answers from other people. It's encouraging other people to step into their leadership. So it's about, everybody has contributions to make, and recognizing that we are all part of a bigger whole, that you lead from your perspectives. And if we have more people leading and feeling empowered to show up with their ideas and their best self, then we're going to have so much more lift and impact, rather than waiting for one person to have all the answers.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. And that notion about leadership is still pretty countercultural. I've been teaching leadership now for 30-some years, and really started to focus on the inner work of leaders about 25 years ago with intention. And it's gaining more traction, but it's still kind of a novel way to think about leadership. And you said that at the center you almost didn't use that language or go into that arena. Can you talk to us about why?
Sure, and I think it's because in trying to define the people that we've worked with over all these years and expand the number of people who need more courage in the world, we started with a program called The Courage to Teach, and it was for teachers and administrators who are just trying to stay connected to their passion for teaching, but also how can they bring themselves to renew education as a whole, or physicians and nurses. Not everybody recognizes themselves as a leader, so the courage to lead may sound like something, oh, that's for someone else, that's not for me. So it's a fine line between, are we serving people? We see leadership more as a verb, an action that you take rather than a position that you hold. But we also serve teachers and the medical community and nonprofit leaders, clergy and faith communities, reaching into the business world or government. I mean, there's so many professional sectors that can stay siloed or can stay like, oh, well, that's not just our audience. We're talking about collective courage and collective impact. And what everybody has in common is that they are leading in a new way. They're leading authentically, or it's transformational leadership, or they have tapped into their courage to lead. So leadership was also a way of trying to define what we have in common, and we couldn't come up with another word. So, yeah, I still don't know if leadership is the right word, but that's where we thought we would try it out loud. And so the subtitle of the book is Leading and Living with Integrity, and that turns it more into an action word rather than leadership as this is only for leaders. It's about leadership.
Got it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So I want to ask you, how, in your view, can people best use your book?
Well, I've had a lot of people since it came out tell me that this would be a great book to use for book groups or in discussions, because so much of what we do in retreats is we talk about reflection with other people. So if you have even one other person to go through the book with and have a chance to talk about what you're learning or practice with each other, we go into the touchstones, and then there's stories along the way in each chapter of real life leaders, the people that I've interviewed. That's one way to do it. And we are working on a reader's guide. We just haven't gotten it out yet. So stay tuned and stay patient about that. There is a website, courageway.org, where we've created an introductory email series. Right now there's about 8 emails that are spaced about a week apart that give a practice and a reflection that you can use as an ongoing activity to kind of start looking into these ideas some more.
Is that a resource that people can tap into, or do you have to have a special membership or something to gain access to that?
That is a free resource. It's an email series. So if you go to courageway.org, scroll down a little bit, there's a sign-up form, and you'll start receiving emails spaced out a few days apart. So free resource there. There will be some things you can download. There's the touchstones. You can get a printout of those. I think you can also use the book just in terms, I love to do this myself, is just open to any page and read a short section. There's a lot of really wonderful quotes in there that you can just take with you into your day, think about.
Okay. So lots of different ways to read it and to use it and to apply it, it sounds like, and to share it with other people. Yeah.
I think it's really meant to suggest some new ideas and suggest some practices that you can try out. You could buy a blank 3-ring binder or a spiral notebook and take some notes as you go, or just take notes in the margins.
Yeah.
Feel free to mark it up, make it messy, turn down the corners of the pages.
I love that. You probably are familiar with one of my favorite poets, Naomi Shihab Nye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she talks about books that are well used, well loved, or marked up and dog-eared, and then we pass them on, right?
Yeah, exactly. I love buying used books and seeing all the underlines.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming close to the end of our time together, and I just wonder, Shelly, are there any questions that you wished I had asked you that I didn't, that you'd like to maybe respond to, or any additional comments that you'd like to share with us about your book or your practice or about the Center for Courage and Renewal?
There's one other thing that I learned in writing the book that I have found really helpful to start thinking about how I build my own courage. And it comes from the idea that as I was interviewing people for the book, I started noticing, that we're so much in fight or flight mode as a society right now, that those are our go-tos. Those are our stress responses of fight or flight. And then I started digging into that more, and fight, flight, freeze. I was in New Zealand, and they said, well, we talk a lot about freeze as a stress response, like that deer caught in headlights. Mm-hmm. And then another leader that I interviewed, I was telling her this idea, and she's like, well, flock is another thing that researchers are starting to point out and notice as a stress response. And flock is that sense of us versus them, or the herd mentality, or even peer pressure. And so there's these 4, I think of them as the 4 corners that we go to when we're so stressed out. For me, I probably go to freeze or flee. My tendency isn't to fight, but for each of these stress responses, there's a positive aspect of it. So the importance of fighting for what you believe in, or fighting for what's right, speaking up, standing up for what you believe in, is a really positive version of the fight response. The flee response might be taking a time out, or knowing when it's important to just walk away from a conflict and give yourself some space to breathe and take time out, or flee a country. We see that with the refugee situation. That's a big one, but it's an important, taking charge of your life, or maybe in some cases it's because you have no other choice. Mm-hmm. Freeze might be taking a moment to pause, or take a retreat, or just stop for a minute rather than run away, or rather than fight. And then flock goes back to the idea of community. How do you find your people who can be supportive of you? But what was so amazing is it's not just that there's these 4 options. There's always another option, and that's the word fortify. So how do you fortify yourself so that you can choose another response rather than just react out of stress? So, and fortify comes from the same word as fortitude, which is another word for courage. I'm like, oh, that's what we're doing here. These practices, these touchstones fortify us, and the community we build fortify us so that we can lead from the heart and not lead from our gut responses, or only lead from our intellect and our head. Like fortifying ourselves lets us lead from the heart. And I think that's probably been one of my favorite things to just keep paying attention to, and ask myself on a hard day is, how could I fortify myself right now? And sometimes it's just, well, then go to sleep or call somebody, or go have fun. But I think that's one of my best takeaways, is asking each other how we can find our fortitude and fortify each other and fortify ourselves.
I love that, and thank you for talking about those 4 zones that we typically go to, and also looking at the other side, the positives, and that we can choose. If we just stop long enough, and that's like a nanosecond usually, we can also choose fortitude. So, I was just looking at my notes. There's one question I didn't ask that I actually asked it, but I coupled it with another question, so I want to just make sure that if you want to say more about it, that you have time to do that. And and that's
Okay.
the question about practices. I mean, you've touched on a lot of them. You talked about the 3 touchstones out of the many that are part of the Courage and Renewal work, and I've heard you name practices throughout the conversation, but for our listeners, are there some that you'd like to maybe really surface and underscore and amplify so that they can know what we're talking about when we say the word practice, because not everybody really understands that?
Sure. I think just the concept of practice at all is probably countercultural, or something that we don't always think about in terms of what's the thing that you do every day that connects you to your heart or connects you to what's important in your life. It doesn't matter what you do. I mean, for some people, practice might be that you go running every day, or some people might meditate and that's their practice. And so the touchstones is this collection of practices that you can do one at a time or all together. They are ways of being. I think of them as tools, or, if you think about a hammer, it can become an extension of yourself if you're a carpenter. It just becomes that thing you need to have to do your job. Mm-hmm. And for some people, it's their iPhone. Or their phones become an extension of themselves. You can almost hardly get through your day without it. But what if you had practices like turning to wonder that became an extension of yourself, that you could access, or that were at your fingertips, that you could use as a tool to get you past a rough moment, or that could help you interact with somebody more authentically? I think these practices take practice, because you can't just read them and say, oh, now I know what to do. I mean, leadership is this daily practice, becoming a human. It takes practice to keep growing as a human. So it's really just the idea that it's not about practice makes perfect. It's just about recognizing that you can't just do this instantly. There's no quick fix. It's something that you can just build into how you want to, a way of life and a way in life, or a way of being. I think that's how I would describe practices.
Okay, thank you. I have many practices, but probably the one that's forefront in my life is a practice of gratitude. And I think about practice, in a fairly spiritual way, but also, just an everyday practical way. Most people understand that it takes practice to learn how to ride a bicycle, right? You don't just get on a bicycle, a two-wheeler, and not fall down. And so you have to take little steps, the tricycle, maybe for some of us, the training wheels, and it takes a long time to really work up the kind of mastery where you don't fall down on a two-wheeler. And the same thing with an everyday practice. It's not just something that you can do occasionally and have it become a way of being, but something that you do over time, gradually, incrementally, and over and over and over again, right? So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So, Shelly, are there any projects that you are working on, or any places that you're taking the book that you'd like to share with our listeners so that they can learn more about your work and maybe follow you and just get more into the Courage Way?
Sure. Well, CourageWay.org has a variety of quote plates that people can click on. On social media, there's both the Center for Courage and Renewal. So on Facebook, it's Courage Renewal. On Twitter, it's Courage Renewal, as well as my tweet handle is Shelly L. Francis. We have facilitators all over the world, U.S., Canada, United Kingdom, Australasia. So there's people all over to connect with as well. So it's not just me as the author. I'm representing all of the facilitators in this movement. So check out the website, couragerenewal.org, if you want to look into finding a facilitator or retreats that you'd like to go get an in-person experience of this with. Okay.
Great, thank you. And are you doing any book events around the country or internationally that you'd like to share with our listeners as well?
No, I don't have any specifically on the schedule. I've done a few of those already. And so we're probably moving online until things sort of start lining up again. We're a nonprofit, so our budget is, my next work is to continue raising money so that we can keep spreading the word. Next year, I hope to go to Australia.
Yeah, good for you. And you've had an opportunity to talk about the book with Parker as well, right? Parker Palmer?
I have, and we actually have 2 webinars that we did when the book first launched that were a lot of fun to have those conversations, and those are accessible from